Welcome to Drupal Camp Asheville. You are in the session for professional dog grooming. Welcome. How's everybody doing?
All right.
Not bad? Yeah? How about the show? These guys have done a pretty nice job, haven't they? Yeah? Not bad? Cool. So this is modular development in Drupal 8. We are from Civic Actions. Civic Actions is a vendor, a Drupal vendor that does all kinds of stuff. We do a lot of open source work, a lot of Drupal work, and mostly for public sector clients. My name is Adam. I go by the Drupal.org username of Nerdstein. My last name is Bergstein. I am the Associate Director of Engineering at Civic Actions. I have a master's in of Science and Information Systems and Security, and I maintain a couple Drupal modules, specifically the 8 versions.
And I'm Iris. Hi, everyone. I am a front-end developer at Civic Actions. My last name is Ibekwe, which is a Nigerian last name. I migrated here 6 years ago and currently live in Virginia. I geek out on responsive development and anything that has to do with getting a site performing good.
Here's a brief outline of what we're going to cover during our talk. We're going to introduce some ideas and concepts. We're going to talk about some of the problems that we've run into that are pretty well known. We're going to look at what happens during a design phase of projects, like if you're building a site. Drupal core, some theming work, a little bit of contrib thrown in here. And we're going to give you a demo of some tools so you can kind of see how some of these pieces fit together. So why don't we start with the background? All right, terminology. Isn't this always where you get tripped up? That there's like 18,000 ways to communicate the same idea? And I just am convinced that as a community or even a discipline, we like to just confuse ourselves over and over and over again. At least we're not consistent. We know that. So what are we talking about here? Well, the presentation's called Modular Development in Drupal 8. Well, what are we talking about? Are we building a Drupal module? Are we doing, right? See the confusion? But we have a lot of synonyms for what we're talking about when we refer to modular development. We're looking at a module, a component, a pattern, right? And the list goes on. Tomato, whatever, right? So what are we talking about here? Well, we want to look at taking designs that are given as developers, breaking them down into smaller parts, because we know that if something is smaller, we can look at it more carefully, we can digest it, we can understand it, and hopefully we can try to come up with some patterns because we're developers. We like to find those patterns and promote some reusability. And if that reusability exists, then we know that what we're doing can operate in a more consistent way. Make sense? So someone kind of beat us to this. He's sort of smart. His name is Brad Frost, and in 2013, he came up with the idea of atomic design. Okay, so it basically had the following concepts, where we start out at the smallest piece called an atom. And we go and we constantly are building up those atoms in larger ways. So a couple atoms together might be a molecule or an organism. And then templates. And then we hit the peak, which is a page. So what are some problems then in trying to follow these conventions to build a modular site or a modular development approach? Well, the first problem, we already talked about this a bit, is we're aiming to promote reusability, right? So that is probably the first problem we want to solve, because our designs and the work that we're doing should be consistent. Would you all agree? Yeah. This is what we think of consistency when we see people that don't try to do this, right? So case in point, the same styles need to be applied throughout the site. And if we make good use of reusability, then we're automatically doing that, right? We'll have that consistency, we inherit things, life is good. The second problem we thought about focusing on here is really around, like, why is this not happening easily right now? And I think it's around defining specifications. And I'm going to totally butcher this name, but Lakshmi Pratori has a really awesome quote that I think kind of summarizes this space up pretty well. I'm just going to read it. I apologize for reading from the slides. When you are allowed to study different disciplines, you redefine your idea of success. You learn to appreciate multiple disciplines simultaneously, and you learn that there is no one formula to do anything. And isn't that fitting in this space? I think it is. So what is happening here? What is the conflict whenever we are trying to get specifications? Well, guess what? Design and development are two completely different disciplines. They do not fit together, right? One is extremely creative and the other is extremely analytical. Right brain, left brain, right? It's kind of one of those conflicts. So it's really, really hard for these two disciplines to connect and define something that's clear from something that's creative into something that's technical. So that's the space we're in. Brace yourself. Team building exercises are coming. The next one here, the next problem is around technical diversity. And I think this is a major issue, is right now, a lot of these ideas, this was kind of formed in 2013, but some of the principles have been around for quite a long time. And there's all this different technology that exists that are out there that in some way, shape, or form can be combined to solve these problems. And we heard a presentation earlier by a gentleman at Media Current who listed even a completely different way of solving these problems than what we're going to show you today. So there's really not a lot of consistency. This is stuff that's being pioneered at this point in time, a lot of innovation. But really, there's so much a lack of clarity around the technology itself that really, how do you do this? There's SAS, Compass, Gulp, Grunt. I mean, I listed a whole bunch of these here that you guys can see, and they all in some way, shape, or form can fit in. So our claim to this and what we explored as part of this presentation is we just wanted some clarity to get an approach for doing this. We're not suggesting to any of you that this is the right approach or the wrong approach or what have you, but we're just saying we need an approach. And that was why we wanted to capture our lessons and put them into this presentation.
Thank you. So we basically have a bunch of cycles that we usually go through when we're developing a site, and we usually start from the design phase. And we produce the wireframes and the comps, and we try to make it really simple because like we all know, the wireframe shouldn't really have much details in it, but...
Sorry, I'm recording here too. Could you come a little closer?
Sorry. This is better. So the wireframes don't have much detail in them, so we just start really simple. And okay. So that's a typical wireframe. We have the mobile and we have just the responsive layouts for it. And once we finish getting that up, we start adding more details to the designs. So
Sorry, I had to add that slide in there.
Yeah, he totally put it in there. He sneaked it up on me.
And her face is red because she's the one presenting right now.
So, well, okay, so this is what a design comp is. I think we basically know what it is. We just have a layout of what we need and the positioning. And then we have a visual representation of it. We need to show the different pages and everything that should be there. But then after that, after building that comp, we then need to break it up into reusable pieces because that's the best way to start.
Yeah, and here's an example of like going from a wireframe, having that rough layout to a comp. You guys have probably all seen that 100 times.
Yes. So we do that for multiple pages. and we usually use, there are different tools we can use. I basically use my Balsamic a lot and Sketch, but like I say, there's all sorts of web apps out there. But then here's where the real breaking up starts, because now we need to define the elements that we need to reuse, and according to the Bradford's, the way he broke them up into molecules and atoms and all of that. So we now basically get the comps and try to slice them up. Usually there are different ways of doing this. This is basically what you can have. Like if you're in an office and you're collaborating with people live, you could basically actually print out a page and slice it up and put it up on drawing boards just to break up the page into the different molecules that kind of make up the pages. For example, the atoms. The atoms are like the smallest building blocks of a template. So we could have a link as an atom. We could have an image, and basically even a search input field within a form would be an atom. And then molecules are made up of atoms. So once we identify all the atoms that are within our layouts and what we're building, that's what we use. We kind of stick to our atoms and use it to build up to build up our molecules as we go larger. So an example of, am I moving faster than the slides? Yes. I kind of skipped. Okay, so we have examples of components. And components can be made up of atoms, molecules, organisms. It depends on how large we want to go. For an example, this is an image rotator, and it has a few atoms within it. Like the image is an atom, and the little thumbnails are atoms too. And then we just put them together, and this we will define as an organism, as a molecule, because it's just made up of atoms just for the rotator. And this is a different example too. The media block, we use that all the time. It's like everywhere. Basically, we have an image, and then it has a title. Sometimes it has a caption. Sometimes it's really big. Like if it's a featured image, the image will be big, but it will still have an image, a title, and text, and it's still just a molecule.
This is actually a good example of an organism because it's showing the molecule and then a list of them. Like you can see them there.
Oh yes, the entire list is like different molecules together. Yes, that's true. Thank you. So the question is, once we've broken up all of these into components, into these molecules and atoms, how do we map this into Drupal 8?
So for a lot of developers in the room, this might be, very introductory, but I think you'll see the story we're telling here as we continue to move on. So we started by looking at Drupal 8 core and seeing, well, what tools or what parts of Drupal core help as part of this problem space? And you guys shouldn't be surprised by really any of this. The first one are basically the data structures that you typically have on a Drupal site. And the key use case that we're trying to capture with these data structures are this. We want to represent a consistent set of elements and options for the same page template, okay? That's the key part of the sentence there. So the data structures that we're looking at in Drupal really provide us kind of global templates that we can work within. They have fieldable entities that allow the same structures to be used consistently across each one of the different entities that we're looking at. And that includes content types and taxonomies and things that basically ship with Drupal out of the box, right, that we can add different fields or change the attributes to the bundle or the node type or what have you. And we have then consistency in our structure. And so that allows every single one of those instances to have a global and consistent behavior for every time that you enter the fields. It renders the same way, right? The next one, and this one I think is actually probably the sexiest, is the blocks. And oh, by the way, the block system was completely redone in Drupal 8. So this is probably the most relevant part of the presentation when it comes to the actual implementation, because it actually is now more extensible than it was in Drupal 7. and I'll get to that in just one moment. So what is the key use case that blocks solve as part of this conversation? Well, we can represent a set of elements that can be placed on more than one page template, right? So it's not consistent per page template. We can now reuse these different things across any page template. So in Drupal 8, they added a concept of a block type. And a block type provides the same type of reusable structure that can be shared across any page type that we want. And it's fieldable so that each block type can have its own structure and fields. I could type in a title and a body or put in an image, right? And this often generally maps to a molecule or an organism. So a block can represent, an image with a title and a piece of text to it, right? And blocks themselves in Drupal 8 are now instances of these block types. They're different than they were in 7, where you only had a set of blocks. So the content can change per block, but the structure does not. The structure persists across everything that inherits the block type. So you can place a block on more than one page in a region or what have you, and you could have as many instances of the block type that you want. So if I want 17 blocks of a media block, I can do it. And it's happy. And it works in Drupal 8. It's kind of cool. The next part that we thought was actually kind of relevant in the components discussion is views themselves. And here's the use case we kind of wrapped our head around. Our goal was to dynamically render data that can be placed on one or more page templates. And that data lives within Drupal, right? So we're going to be scraping data from across the system, and we might have an organism, right, that has a list of information that we're populating, and that would be a view. And just like you guys are all well aware, this is not a cut and dry sort of thing. There's 8,000 ways to skin a cat, right? So we have multiple output types in views. So we could output it as a block, and we could use that as one part of a page, or we can do an entire page with views. It's pretty flexible, right? So we're not fitting directly into one molecule or a template or a page. We can pretty much work within a bunch of, whatever isolated structures we want. So let's talk a little bit about Drupal theming itself, just to see what parts of Drupal theming we can work with in this discussion.
Well, Drupal theming has a lot of This is
this is mine.
Yeah.
Sorry. Presentation fail. I'm going to introduce the templates per block type. So this actually doesn't ship with core, but I'll show you a snippet of code in a moment. One thing that we noticed is because Drupal 8 provides these block types, the one thing that it doesn't provide out of the box is the ability for you to identify a template file, like a twig file, that works directly tied to the same structure of the block type. So the way that we solved that, we wanted to make sure that we had consistent markup for any block type that we were working with or that we built, because we wanted to have full control over how that structure was being rendered, right? We wanted the same markup to be represented consistently for every single block type. And there wasn't a really clean way to do that with core. But this is really useful when we're looking at other front-end tools like Sass and Compass, that we need that consistency to make sure that we have the right partials or what have you, and Iris will get into that shortly. But basically, having this markup consistent allows us to map directly to specific and corresponding styles. So this is, I know, a little bit of code that you can see that basically we wrote a theme suggestion for blocks that uses the same naming convention by block type. So this is a really easy way for you to add these twig files inside of your theme by block type and have it work and have that markup be consistent. And by the way, this code goes into your .theme file in Drupal 8. It's a little bit different than 7.
Okay, so stepping back a bit, our aim is to have are components that are reusable items and blocks within Drupal. And we also want to be able to style them and break up the styles into reasonable components so that they are isolated within a SAS. And then, so we can easily go in and know what's going on with each component and then reuse those styles across the sites. So for example, when we're using SAS partials, we usually arrange them according to SMACs, and that is really like just...
You want that?
Yeah, sure. I grab it, thank you. So it's basically, it has the base and the layout and the components and state and theme, which actually is modules, not components. But because we're within a Drupal context, we don't want to call the components modules, so we don't like mix things up.
Terminology.
Yeah, so we kind of broke things up here. Like we could have a block, and the block is a news teaser. So we could have different types of blocks within the components and within blocks. And then we could have a different type of component like a view and also arrange them in that way. And probably just import the partials using Compass or whatever is useful. And then we also name the classes within each block using BEM, which is block elements modifier. It's the convention for classes. And when you have a block, which is basically the component, you could break it up into, okay, I can't because of this. You could break it up into elements. For example, I have a media block on the side there, and there's an image in it, and there's a caption. So the image would be media image, and that will be the elements within the block. So the image is an element. And that image could have a modifier, maybe media image large, and that would be a different type of image, and we would notify that with double hyphens. And then also we could have different variants of the media block. Like if it's a featured block, it would be, maybe the image will be bigger or it will be in a different position in the site. Then we could just have the featured, like dash featured, and that's a different modifier, different type of a media block. So this makes it really easy for, like, if a developer comes in the middle of a project, once they look at this, they would know exactly what's going on, exactly where the style should be going. And I know it looks like we're adding a lot of classes, and in the CSS, we'll have more classes, but we'll have better structure. And you could really make it simpler to write this with SAS. Like if you use the ampersand, you could just have .block, then nest the selectors within with ampersand and underscore elements. So you will still have what you need. Okay, and now it's time for Drupal contrib. I think this is my Pattern Lab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so these are some tools that we can use, and Pattern Lab is really something that has come up within the past few years. And what it essentially does is creates like a prototype of your site in HTML, and it makes it really easy for you to go from design to something that is based on HTML, and you could work with, your clients could see immediately what things can happen before you start developing it in the back end in Drupal. So in Pattern Lab, you can break things up. You actually take your design, break it up into components like atoms and molecules, and then you map your atoms in HTML or Twig in Pattern Lab. So when you get into Pattern Lab, you would see every element on your site, like your headers, like your links, every single thing will be there. And
we're going to demo that later.
Yeah, we will show you that. And it just gives you a living style guide too, because as you change your classes, as you change styles on your site, you can share the same SAS files and CSS within your site, and your style guide will continuously get regenerated within Pattern Lab. So this is an example. This is a screenshot of Pattern Lab. This, excuse me, this actually shows you an entire page within Pattern Lab. It has every element right here. And it's also responsive. It actually has the disco setting where it just shows you different responsive sites. I think we'll demo that too. That's pretty interesting. Now, there's a theme. There are actually a number of solutions, Drupal themes, that have tried to map what we have in Pattern Lab into Drupal core, where you can share templates or import templates between Drupal and your theme, and also share the SAS. And so you can, it's, because one problem we had with Pattern Lab, I used it last year, and it was, we found out that we needed to maintain two different libraries of HTML and Twig templates. So we'll have our templates in Drupal, and we'll have them in Pattern Lab too. Sorry, that wasn't last year, that was January, like, time flies. So we would...
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, it's not that long. This is pretty recent. So it turned out to be really clunky because our client needed to see the site and would have loved to have a style guide, but it just got too heavy having to maintain, change. Every time we change something in views within Drupal, we would have to go back into Pattern Lab and change a template there just to reflect our changes. So that got a bit heavy. So right now we're trying to show how the templates can map into with Drupal themes suggestions, and they can be reused also. I think you should have more thoughts about that.
Yeah, and we're going to show a bit about how this all kind of fits together and connects in a demo, and it's going to be a very, very, very simple demo. Yeah, we'll get to that momentarily. One other really cool part of this is the components module. So one thing that the components module does, and it was written by John Albin, is basically it helps to do the embedding of templates within other templates. So if you think of an organism or a molecule, it could consist of more than one atoms, right? So whenever you're bringing them in, you need a way to be able to load them inside of a Twig file so you don't, you can reuse the code, right? So the components module basically does that. And the way that it handles that, because Drupal has specific attributes within each organism or molecule that it's producing as well. It has specific fields or values that it's going to be displaying. So the atom needs to be able to support the input from where it's being rendered to the atom itself. And so the way that that happens is basically through a mapping. So you map the attributes that start from the organism and pass down to the atom itself. And it kind of looks a little bit like this. So if you think about the block types in Drupal, we might have an image rotator, and that would map, its attributes would map over to a headline and a thumbnail image, right? And then the media block could be a headline, a thumbnail image, and a description. So it's really just this connection module that allows you to bring different Twig files together and map their attributes. So another really crucial part of this, and what's not in core yet, or maybe it's coming, I'm not sure, is basically the whole panels and panelizer and lightning contrib space and the problems that they're solving right now. And so the use case that we looked at with this specifically is I want to be able to manage blocks specifically on a page on my site, right? And the way that blocks work in Drupal 8 out of the box is you place them in a region, right? And you do have the ability to specify the context, like, oh, it should only show up on these pages. But the interface for doing that is every block that's in the site, right? So this use case is I want to be able to manage the blocks that I want on a page-by-page basis. So the way that we're doing that is looking at panels. That's what it solves. So panels provides page-specific layouts, allows you to create instances of blocks per page, place existing blocks that might exist on a page, and Panelizer extends that use case into nodes or content types, right? So you can panelize a content type. And the last piece of contributed work that we really just wanted to bring up more for informational purposes at this point is also the Zen theme. And this was covered pretty extensively in the earlier presentation by the gentleman at Media Current. and he talked a lot about using the Zen theme in the components module and using the KSS tool, which is right here, for doing living style guides. And so there's a lot more information on their project page and a lot more documentation, but they also make use of the components module. It's been teased out of the theme, so it can be used for other purposes as well. But it's something to look at because they're definitely really steering the Zen theme into a direction that is completely component driven. So it'd be worth looking at. And we're going to do a really high-level demonstration now. We're going to close down the slide deck, and we'll do a quick, just little